My name is Ethan. I'm 28 years old, and until last October, I worked seasonal jobs all over the Pacific Northwest. Logging crews, hiking trail maintenance, wildfire support, you name it. If it kept me outdoors and paid enough to cover rent during the winter, I'd take it. That's how I ended up accepting what looked like the easiest job I'd ever had. A private forestry company needed someone to spend 3 weeks at an old fire watch tower in the mountains of western Montana. The official fire season had already ended, but they were investigating a series of expensive equipment thefts from remote locations. They wanted someone stationed nearby to report suspicious activity. No patrols, no hiking, no dangerous work. Just stay in the tower, monitor the radio, and call if you saw anyone. The pay was almost double what I'd normally make. I accepted without thinking twice. The company truck dropped me off shortly before sunset. The watchtower stood alone on top of a rocky ridge surrounded by endless pine forest. It looked ancient, probably built sometime in the 1940s. The wooden stairs creaked beneath every step, and the entire structure leaned just enough to make you notice. The nearest paved road was almost 30 miles away. The closest town was over an hour by truck. No cell service, no internet, only a landline connected to a ranger station and an old emergency radio. The supervisor who drove me there, a man named Rick, barely helped unload my supplies. "Everything you need's inside," he said. I nodded. As he climbed back into the truck, he hesitated. "If the radio starts acting strange—" He stopped speaking. "What?" He looked toward the forest. "Never mind." He forced a smile. Probably just interference. Then he drove away. I watched the truck disappear around the mountain road until the sound of the engine completely faded. For the first time that day, it was completely silent. Not city silent, not suburban silent, real wilderness silence. The kind where you suddenly realize how small you are. The first 2 days were almost relaxing. I'd wake up with the sunrise, drink terrible instant coffee, write in a notebook, watch deer moving through the valleys below. Sometimes I'd see black bears hundreds of yards away wandering between the trees. The radio stayed quiet. No visitors, no vehicles, nothing. I started wondering why they were paying so much. On the evening of the third day, I found the first thing that felt wrong. Inside one of the storage cabinets was an old logbook. The cover was faded. Most entries dated back years. Every fire lookout had apparently written notes before leaving. Weather conditions, wildlife sightings, maintenance reports, normal stuff. Until I reached the final pages. The handwriting suddenly changed, messy, uneven, like someone whose hands wouldn't stop shaking. The first sentence read, "If you're reading this after sunset, don't answer anyone on Channel 3. I frowned. The next page said, "They know people's names." Another page, "They only call after dark." Another, "If someone asks you to come outside, they already know you're awake." I laughed to myself. Someone had clearly been bored, maybe trying to scare the next lookout. I closed the book and put it back. I wish I'd left it open. That night, the temperature dropped below freezing. The wind hammered against the tower windows. Around 11:40 p.m., the radio crackled, loud. It startled me so badly I spilled coffee across the desk. Static filled the room. Then a voice. "Fire Tower 12. The signal sounded old, distorted, like someone speaking through water. I grabbed the microphone. "Tower 12 here." Static. "Is everything normal?" "Yeah." "Anyone outside?" I looked through every window. Nothing. "No." Long silence. Then, "Good." The transmission ended. That was it. I shrugged it off. Probably another ranger checking in. I went to bed. 20 minutes later, the radio turned on by itself. This time, there was only breathing. Slow, steady. Someone wasn't speaking. They were just listening. I pressed the transmit button. "This is Tower 12. Go ahead." No answer. Only breathing. Then, "Don't look toward the trees." The transmission stopped. Every hair on my arm stood up. Without thinking, I looked toward the trees. Nothing, just darkness. Thousands of pine trees swaying in the wind. I laughed nervously. Someone was messing with me. Had to be. I shut the radio off, pulled the power cable out, then climbed into bed. 5 minutes later, the radio spoke again, without power. "Ethan." My blood froze. I hadn't told anyone on the radio my name. "He's standing below you." I couldn't breathe. The tower was nearly 50 feet above the ground. There was only one staircase leading up. Slowly, very slowly, I walked toward the nearest window. I told myself this was a prank, a trick, maybe someone from the company hiding in the woods. I looked down. The staircase was empty. The clearing below was empty. No truck, no flashlight, nothing. I almost smiled. Then, movement. Not below the tower, farther back, between the trees. Someone was standing perfectly still, too far away to see their face. They weren't moving, not even slightly. I stared for almost a full minute. The figure never shifted its weight, never scratched its head, never turned. It simply stood there, watching the tower, watching me. Then the radio whispered the last sentence. "Don't blink." I don't remember blinking, but somehow, when I looked back, the figure was gone. The forest was empty again, except the gravel below the tower now echoed with something I hadn't heard all week, the slow, unmistakable sound of footsteps climbing the wooden stairs. The footsteps stopped just outside the tower door. One final creak, then silence. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, gripping the heavy flashlight so tightly my fingers hurt. The old wooden walls groaned in the wind, but beneath that, I couldn't hear breathing, movement, or even the sound of someone shifting their weight. Just silence. Then came 3 slow knocks. Knock. A pause. Knock. Another pause. Knock. They were deliberate, calm, like whoever was outside knew I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't answer. Another minute passed, then the radio crackled to life again. I had unplugged it. I had watched the cable hanging from the wall, yet the speaker hissed with static before a familiar voice whispered, "Ethan, don't open the door." My mouth went dry. The voice sounded almost identical to the one I'd heard before. But then another voice came through, louder, panicked. "Ethan, open the door! Ranger service! Open it now!" I instinctively stepped toward the entrance. Then I remembered the journal. They know people's names. I stopped. The second voice became impatient. "Sir, we received an emergency signal from your tower. Open the door." No emergency signal had been sent. I hadn't touched the radio. The pounding suddenly became violent. The entire wooden door shook in its frame. Bang! 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 "Ethan!" The tower trembled with every hit. Whoever or whatever was outside was incredibly strong. I backed away until my shoulders hit the opposite wall. Then, everything stopped. Not gradually. Instantly. No pounding. No wind. No radio. Nothing. The silence was somehow worse. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. As dawn finally broke over the mountains, I looked outside expecting to find footprints in the frost. There weren't any. The staircase was clean. The gravel below the tower was untouched. Even the thin layer of frost covering the handrail hadn't been disturbed. It was as if nothing had ever climbed those stairs. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined everything, until I noticed something hanging from the doorknob. A small brass key. Attached to it was a faded paper tag. Written in black marker were 4 words. "Basement. Don't lose this." My stomach tightened. basement? There wasn't supposed to be a basement. After sunrise, I searched the tower from top to bottom, the main room, the storage closet, the kitchen. Nothing. Finally, I moved an old metal cabinet away from one wall. Hidden beneath it was a square wooden hatch. The padlock hanging from it matched the key perfectly. For several minutes, I simply stared at it. Every instinct told me to leave it alone. Instead, I unlocked it. The hatch opened with a loud groan. A narrow ladder disappeared into darkness. Cold air drifted upward. It smelled damp, old, like a place sealed for decades. I aimed my flashlight downward and climbed carefully. The room below was larger than I expected. Concrete walls, rusted shelves, old emergency supplies. Dust covered almost everything, except one path. A clean trail through the dust led toward a steel door at the far end. Someone had walked there recently, very recently. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I followed the trail. The steel door had no handle on the outside, only thick scratches, hundreds of them. Some were so deep they cut through the paint. Something had desperately tried to get out, or someone had desperately tried to get in. Bolted to the wall beside the door was another notebook. This one looked newer than the journal upstairs. The first page read, "If the door is open, run." My pulse quickened. I turned another page. "If the knocking starts below you, never answer it." Another page. "Do not trust voices on the radio after sunset. They're not using it to communicate. They're using it to find you." I swallowed hard. Then I reached the final entry. The handwriting became shaky, almost unreadable. "It learns every person it takes. First your name, then your voice, then your memories." A loud metallic sound echoed through the basement. Clang! It came from behind the steel door. I slowly turned toward it. Silence. Then another sound. A slow scrape, as though nails or something much harder were dragging across the other side. The scraping continued for nearly 30 seconds. Then it stopped. A voice came through the metal, weak, barely above a whisper. "Help." It sounded like an elderly man. "I'm trapped." I didn't move. "Please." The voice trembled. "I've been trapped here for days." I looked at the heavy locking wheel on the door. It was still secured. Then the voice spoke again. "Ethan." I stumbled backward. "I know you're there." It laughed, not loudly, not wildly, just a quiet chuckle. And then it spoke in Rick's voice, the supervisor who had dropped me off. "See? I told you the radio acts strange." Every muscle in my body locked. There was no way Rick could be behind that door. He had driven away 3 days earlier. The laughter changed again. This time, it was my own voice. Perfect. Every word, every breath. I wouldn't open it either. The flashlight slipped from my hand. Its beam rolled across the floor until it stopped facing the steel door. For a split second, through the narrow gap beneath it, I saw movement. Not feet, not claws. Dozens of pale fingers slowly feeling their way under the crack, stretching farther than any human hand ever could. I ran. I didn't even pick up the flashlight. I climbed the ladder as fast as I could, slammed the hatch shut, dragged the cabinet back into place, and pushed every piece of furniture in the tower against it. Only then did I realize something. The sun was already beginning to set, and outside the windows, the same motionless figure had returned to the tree line. Except this time, it wasn't alone. There were 3 of them, standing perfectly still, watching the tower, waiting for darkness.
The sun disappeared behind the mountains much faster than I expected. One minute, the tops of the pine trees glowed orange. The next, the forest became a wall of black. The three figures never moved. They stood shoulder to shoulder at the edge of the tree line where the last light faded in the darkness. No flashlights, no backpacks, no visible faces, just silhouettes, watching. I locked every window, checked the door twice, and shoved the kitchen table against it, even though I knew it wouldn't stop anyone determined to get inside. By 8:30 p.m., the temperature had dropped below freezing. The wind had vanished. That bothered me more than anything. A mountain without wind felt wrong. It was as if the entire forest had stopped breathing. Then the radio came alive, not with static this time, with music. An old country song, distorted and muffled, as if it were playing from a broken cassette tape somewhere deep underground. The music faded. A calm voice spoke. "Fire Tower 12, your replacement has arrived." I didn't answer. "We know you're tired, Ethan." Silence. "You can go home now." Another voice interrupted. This one belonged to my younger sister. She had died in a car accident 9 years earlier. "Ethan," I nearly dropped a flashlight. "I've missed you." Every memory I had buried came rushing back. For one terrifying second, I wanted to answer. Then I remembered the journal. It learns every person it takes. First your name, then your voice, then your memories. I ripped the microphone from the desk and threw it across the room. The speaker kept talking anyway. At exactly 9:17 p.m., someone began climbing the stairs, slow, heavy, one step at a time. The old wooden staircase groaned beneath the weight. Creak, pause, creak, pause. Whoever it was wanted me to hear every step. When the footsteps reached the landing, they stopped. 3 slow knocks echoed through the tower. Knock, knock, knock. Then a familiar voice. "Rick, it's me." Silence. "I came back." Another pause. "I made a mistake leaving you here." I squeezed my eyes shut. No, Rick wouldn't drive 2 hours into the mountains in the middle of the night without headlights, without an engine, without making any noise until he reached the stairs. The voice sighed. "You're smarter than the last one." The smile disappeared from Rick's voice. What came next sounded ancient, like dozens of people speaking in perfect unison. "We'll wait." Around midnight, something changed outside. The 3 figures were gone. Instead, the forest itself began moving. Thousands of branches swayed at once, not because of wind, because something enormous was passing between them. I never saw its full shape, only pieces. A pale arm longer than a tree trunk, a shoulder sliding between the pines, a head that disappeared into darkness before my eyes could focus on it. Every few seconds, another impossible shape emerged and vanished again. It never entered the clearing. It didn't have to. The figures returned, except now there weren't 3. There were dozens, standing in complete silence all around the tower, each one facing upward, each one looking directly at me. Then the hatch beneath the floor slammed once. The cabinet I had pushed over it jumped nearly an inch. Another slam, harder. The entire floor vibrated. The steel door below hadn't opened. Whatever was trapped down there was no longer alone. More impacts followed, not from one direction, from every direction beneath the tower. Something was moving through the earth. The knocking spread under the floor like footsteps beneath thin ice. The old journal suddenly slipped from the shelf and landed beside me. I hadn't touched it. The final page, one I somehow hadn't seen before, contained a single sentence. "They cannot enter unless you answer them or stay until sunrise after the 3rd night." I looked at my watch. 12:41 a.m. This was the 3rd night. That was why they had waited, not to break in, to make sure I stayed. I wasn't waiting for sunrise. I grabbed my backpack, emergency flare, truck keys, and the revolver the company had left locked in the cabinet for wildlife emergencies. I threw the door open. The landing outside was empty. Every figure had disappeared. The staircase stretched into darkness. I lit the flare. Red light flooded the clearing. Nothing. No people, no movement. I ran. Every step down the staircase felt like it would collapse beneath me. The moment my boots hit the ground, the forest exploded with noise. Branches snapped. Footsteps surrounded me. Not one pair, hundreds. I sprinted toward the parked company truck. The keys shook so badly I dropped them twice before unlocking the door. The engine refused to start. Once, twice, 3 times. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. I looked in the rearview mirror. The clearing was full, not with people, with copies of me. Everyone wearing my same clothes, everyone carrying the same backpack, everyone staring silently at the truck. Then they all smiled at the exact same moment. The engine roared to life. I slammed the truck into gear and sped down the mountain road without looking back. Trees whipped past in the darkness as rocks slammed against the undercarriage. The radio inside the truck turned on itself. Rick's voice filled the cab. "You left too early." Then my own voice answered, "No." A dozen more voices joined in. "He left exactly when we wanted." The signal dissolved into laughter. I reached the ranger station just before dawn. 2 deputies and a forest supervisor listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, no one laughed, no one called me crazy. The oldest ranger quietly opened a filing cabinet and placed a faded photograph on the desk. It showed the same fire watch tower, taken sometime in the 1980s. Standing on the observation deck was a lone fire lookout. He looked almost exactly like me. Same height, same face, same jacket. Only the photograph had been taken more than 40 years before I was born. The ranger looked at me with exhausted eyes. "We've burned that tower 3 times, he said quietly. "It keeps coming back." I never returned to that mountain, but every October, just after midnight, my police scanner picks up the same transmission. A calm voice buried beneath static. "Fire Tower 12. A pause, then a question. "Is anyone awake?" I never answer, because sometimes, very late at night, I can still hear slow footsteps climbing wooden stairs that no longer exist.